It's my pleasure to introduce Owen Zhou from Denver, Colorado. He specializes in the recording and production of classical music and other artistic events. Owen's clients include orchestras, chamber ensembles such as the Takash Quartet, soloists, colleges, and art schools. As an active performing musician, Owen understands the needs of other artists and will provide personalized services that are tailored to your specific goals. And as an accomplished pianist, Owen holds a Doctor of Musical Arts degree in piano performance from the University of Colorado at Boulder. His master's degree is from Northwestern University and his undergrad from the Eastman School of Music. And today he will share with us more about piano recording basics. Please welcome with me Dr. Owen Zhou.
Thank you for the introduction. And I will share the screen again and we'll get started. One and share. Let me know if it looks correct now.
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, it's my pleasure to do this presentation for you guys. I hope this is going to be useful for all of you going forward. And one thing I want to say is, we only have an hour for this presentation, so it's really, we're kind of skimming the surface of a lot of these topics, and each one of these slides can, you can go down rabbit hole with. So don't feel overwhelmed. But I'm hoping after this, at least we'll get you a good starting point. And when you start, purchasing equipment, you can call your sales engineer at Sweetwater or whichever place you decide to buy from, and you guys can at least, kind of speak the same language in a way. All right, so piano recording. Wow, like where do we even start, right? Well, we need to start by talking about the end product. That's kind of where I like to start with. So we need to start with what is stereo sound, and why is my screen not? There we go. Okay, so what is stereo sound? And most of you guys, I'm sure you listen to music all the time, and most of the music we consume on a daily basis is in stereo format. Well, what is stereo format? Stereo just means two channels, where mono means one channel. So a channel is kind of a weird term too. It's hard to describe, but one channel is really just a single stream of audio information. So stereo means we have two channels. But when you record, you can use multiple microphones, and each microphone is one channel of audio. So you could have four channels eventually mixing down into two channels and so forth. So understanding this is kind of the starting point. Now, when you have surround sound, for a home movie theater and such, you could have 5, 7, or 9 channels of audio. But we're not really concerned with that. For what we do here, it's pretty much always going to be stereo format. The next thing we need to talk about is WAV versus MP3. And I'm sure most of you probably at least heard of MP3 because it's so ubiquitous. WAV format is what we use most often when we actually record. It's the either it's audio recorder or on your laptop, it's going to be WAV format, just because it's way higher quality and it's easier to work with in post-production. So for the longest time, when we had CDs back in the day, CD format was 44.1 kilohertz in 16-bit, and I'll talk about these specifications on the next slide. But it just kind of give you a good starting point thinking in terms of quality. So CD quality is 44.1 kilohertz, 16-bit. I usually record in 48 kilohertz and 24-bit, or 96 kilohertz, 24-bit. Those are my preferred recording formats. And when I deliver, I usually deliver at 48 kilohertz and 24-bit. Now, MP3s, they're way lower quality. I would never record in MP3, but if I need to deliver something that's small in file size, easier to transfer, 320 kilobits per second is okay for delivery. But usually if you can, always work in WAV format. And I think if you're on a Mac system, it's AIFF is the equivalent of WAV. So we'll go on now to what is kilohertz and bit rate. Okay, so these two things are pretty important to at least have a basic understanding of. Sample rate, let's talk about sample rate first. Sample rate essentially is how many samples the system takes per second of your audio signal, okay? So sample rate, think of it as your horizontal resolution, where your bit depth is your vertical resolution. So 44 kilohertz, if we look at this picture on the left, 44 kilohertz means a system will take 44,000 samples per second of your audio signal. Whereas, 96 kilohertz obviously will be 96,000 samples per second, which makes it a lot more precise. Now, bit depth is interesting because you think, oh, 16-bit and 24-bit, that's not a huge difference in number, right? This 24 minus 16 is 8. But it's actually a huge difference because bit is how many times you multiply something by 2. So 16-bit, what that means is you're going to have about 65,000 amplitude samples. Amplitude samples, whereas 24-bit is almost 70 million samples. So what is this vertical resolution though? If we think about music, right? We have dynamics in music. We have piano, forte, mezzo forte, and so forth. So think of it in that regard. With 24-bit, you're going to have way more of a gradient in terms of dynamics. So generally nowadays, we always record in 24-bit. We don't even record in 16-bit anymore. And we also even have 32-bit recording, which is becoming more common. But in terms of recording format, I really recommend 48 kilohertz per second. 48 kilohertz and 24-bit or 96 kilohertz 24-bit. So 24-bit is really, really important nowadays. Now we will go to this slide and talk about kind of the general signal flow, how your system works, and then we'll kind of dive into each of these components in greater detail in a little bit. So obviously we have sound source on the left, and that's going to be, in our case, obviously piano, and that's going to be picked up by the microphone going into some sort of audio interface, because the signal coming out of the microphone is just the electrical signal. We need to convert that into audio somehow, not audio, but into digital audio format. And that's where the analog to digital conversion comes in that enlarged graph underneath it. And then eventually we'll go into the digital audio workstation, which is mostly going to be a computer of some sort. Now we will talk about some of these things, which are pretty neat. And I'm sure a lot of you probably have some experience with these. So these are great options to get started with recording for piano. These are what I call portable recorders with built-in microphones. On the left, we have the Zoom H1N and the Zoom H2N, and those are everywhere on college campuses. I personally have recommended these to my friends too back in the day. And they're great, they're great for what they do. They're very easy to use. Battery life is great, and you can record some things really quickly, and it's easy to work with. The Zoom H5, H6, and the Tascam DR100 Mark III are kind of on a step above because they have the ability to accept external microphones, whereas the H1N and H2N, they do not have that ability. This means you can use higher quality mics with those recorders, but at the same time, they have those built-in mics that, if you don't want to bring your external mics, you can still use them. So they're very versatile. I think for most people, these three on the left, from the H5N toward the right, these three recorders are a really, really good place to start. Now we have, oops, this is not the right slide. Sorry, we're gonna have to, oh, sorry, this is the right slide. So we talked about portable recorders. Now, kind of going back to that chart we saw earlier, these three blocks on the right side, we have microphone, audio interface, and digital audio workstation. If you have a portable recorder that can take microphones, it will essentially cover all three components. And that's why I said those recorders are a really good place to start with. And now we'll go to a different class of recorders that's kind of different from what we just talked about. And these are what we call field recorders without microphones built in. And personally, I have the one on the left, the Tascam DR71D. It's living downstairs on my keyboard right now for teaching Zoom lessons. And I also have the Sound Devices Mix Pre 10, not the 6 shown here. And I'll show you that recorder later after the presentation as part of a little show and tell kind of a thing. But these recorders are definitely a class above, and it's reflected by the price too. You can see, and these are current prices. I just checked a couple days ago to make sure the prices are current. So what they offer is they usually give you more mic inputs, right? You can For the Tascam, at least you can have up to 4 microphones plugged in. So if you want to do multi mic setup, that's great for that. And the sound device is mixed pre 10, again, not the 6, can accept 8 microphones. The preamp quality, it's usually very, very good for these recorders. Yeah, and they're definitely what we can call professional grade because a lot of professionals use them, including myself. Now we will talk about these things. And some of you might have experience with these too. These are USB audio interfaces. I would say 10 years ago, around 10 years ago, I would recommend most people to go this route with recording, at least getting started with recording. But with the advent of the recorders we just saw, these are not that useful for what we do anymore. So these things, what they do is it's acting as a bridge between the microphone and your computer. You plug your microphones into these devices, and then through USB, that's how you get the audio into your computer. They have their advantages. I would say if you have some sort of a stationary setup at home that you don't move a lot, and you have a dedicated computer just for this purpose that sits next to the piano, that's great. That can be kind of your permanent setup. You don't move around a lot. But they are harder to use in a way. And not all computers are suitable for audio production. So you might run into some software or hardware issues, even just getting everything set up. The nice thing with these is the quality are usually very good. The sound quality is excellent. And if you're recording straight into your computer, it's easier for you to, apply a different effect. Say like you put on some reverb after a take so you can listen back and see how that sounds, and you can move your mic around. So it's easier to listen back with these for sure, compared to a little recorder. So yeah, I don't really recommend these to get started, but they definitely have their place. And now we will talk about microphones. So these are the 3 basic microphone types. We have dynamic, condenser, and ribbon. For classical audio recording, we almost always use condenser mics. Sometimes we use ribbons. I personally own 2 pairs of ribbon mics. They're very different. They're very dark and warm. I don't use it on everything, but sometimes like for example, cello, ribbon can sound great, or even violin, it can sound really, really nice. But condenser is what we are going to be talking about the most, and what I would recommend people to look into. For condensers, so one thing to keep in mind is they require power in the form of phantom power, or we call 48 volt. But this is available on pretty much all recorders that accept external mics or audio interfaces. So just make sure you dig into the menu. Sometimes you need to find it, but it's there. It's available on pretty much everything. Now we will talk about the difference between these 2 kind of mics. We have on the left what we call a small diaphragm microphone versus a large diaphragm microphone, and you can kind of see obviously a size difference. And the small diaphragm is what we also call pencil mics, pencil condenser mics, because they look like a pencil. Now for classical recording, we generally use small diaphragm over large for a few reasons. Small diaphragm is, first of all, it's easier to place. It's easier to hide. It's smaller physically. It's easier to work with. But the off-axis response for this small diaphragm is also usually more uniform, so it sounds a little bit better for classical recordings. And because the diaphragm is smaller, it responds faster to what we call transients or fast attacks, especially on the piano. So I would recommend getting started with small diaphragm mics. I mean, large diaphragm can work. There's nothing really wrong with them. If you can get a good deal on a large diaphragm, that's totally fine too. But yeah, small diaphragm is what we usually use in the industry. And now I mentioned off-axis response, and we should talk about polar patterns because these are kind of related. So microphone polar patterns are how microphone pick up sound, or rather where the microphone pick up sound. So these are the 3 most common, but there are other types. But these are the 3 we will see the most. So we have cardioid on the left. Cardioid because it looks like a heart-shaped. That means that the microphone's picking up sound from the front. Imagine 6 o'clock is the microphone body. So 12 o'clock is toward the sound source. So it's picking up from the front. of the microphone. And figure of eight, it's pretty common, especially with ribbon microphones. All ribbon microphones by nature are figure of eight, which means it picks up from the front and the rear, but it rejects the side. And then omni means omnidirectional, which means picking up sound 360 all around the mic, so just a full circle. For piano recording, we tend to use cardioid or omni. I use both quite a lot. And there are microphones that offer multiple polar patterns, and we're going to look at a few of them on the next slide. So these are some examples of small diaphragm condensers with multiple pattern that are being offered. So my very first pair of mics was actually the Studio Projects C4 on the left there, and I've had since accumulated way more microphones since then, but I still use the Studio Projects from time to time, and they're not expensive. They're at a really, really kind of a sweet spot in terms of price to performance. The Rode NT5 is great. The Lauten Audio, I acquired those recently too, I think a couple years ago, and they're really nice. I'll show you them on camera later. I have that right next to me. The Worm Audio is cool. It's a clone of the Neumann. I'm sure some of you heard the brand Neumann KM84. It's a clone of that from Sweetwater. So on the small diaphragm condensers, especially with the Lauten Audio picture, you can kind of see below the mic there are two little cylinder things. So this is how you change the polar pattern on small diaphragm condensers. You actually have to physically swap out the capsule on top, and it's just a little screw thing. It's very easy to do. So you just screw it off and you put a different capsule on to get a different polar pattern. Now we'll look at some large diaphragm options. So again, these are just three examples that I think are in a good price range. I mean, they can go up to thousands of dollars, but to get started, I don't think you need to spend that kind of money, because even these cheap options can sound pretty good, especially with some post-production work. So Audio-Technica, a great brand. I'm sure some of you have heard of them too. Rode, also ubiquitous. We looked at the NT5 earlier. MicTech, I really like this brand. I actually have a pair of their C5 condensers also next to me here. MicTech is based out of Nashville, American company. They make some really, really good stuff. So yeah, these are all three. If you want a large diaphragm, definitely a good starting point to look into. Okay, now we will talk about monitoring. So all of us, I'm sure we have headphones, we have speakers at home, we listen to music on, computer speakers too. But if you want to get the most out of your recordings, I recommend look into some sort of studio monitors. Well, how are they different from speakers? So consumer speakers, computer speakers, home theater speakers, a lot of times their goal is to make the music sound good, but they're not honest, for lack of a better word. So they will color certain parts of the frequency range. For example, they could boost the bass, they could boost the treble, sometimes both. They could scoop the mids to make the mid range a little bit less than the outer ranges. So when you're doing audio production, you want to hear exactly what's in the audio, so you don't want coloring in the sound. So you want what we call a flat frequency response. So nothing gets boosted or cut. So that's where studio monitors come in. They're usually designed to be very, very flat. Some are flatter than others, and there are a ton of examples that that are worth looking into. And I'll give you some examples here. So if your setup or your computer only has a 3.5 millimeter output, that's our typical headphone jack, the tiny one. You can look into the PreSonus, the JBL, and the IK Multimedia. Those models are pretty decent that accepts a 3.5 millimeter. And the reason why I put that as a separate category is most studio monitors take either XLR or 1/4 inch TRS, which is the next category we're going to look at. JBL makes a great pair with a 305, 306. Atom Audio is another great brand. Their A series is a lot more expensive. The T series is relatively new, and it's more of a entry-level product. You're looking at around, I think, $500 for a pair, where the A series can be over $1,000 for a pair of speakers. Kali Audio is really cool. I think they're pretty new too, but they've got a lot of good reviews on audio forums, and they are actually relatively cheap. They're really, really good budget brands. So highly recommend looking to Cali Audio. Personally, I use Tannoy Reveal on my desktop right now, but eventually I think I want to, personally, I want to get the Gold series. They're pretty cool looking and they sound great. Now, if student monitor is not an option, and that's totally fine, you know, giving you setup, a good pair of headphones can get you really far. I actually jump back and forth between my monitors and my headphones just to you know double check the mix. Does it sound good on my headphones? Because sometimes if it sounds good on my headphones, but it doesn't sound good on my speakers, I need to make adjustments. Because your goal is to make it sound decent on all systems. So some of the really good headphones you can look into are the AKG and the Grados, Audio Technica, Biodynamics. These are all very common. You see them a lot on audio forums too. So my current setup at home, I kind of give you a reference point. I run the Tannoy Reveal 502 student monitors. For headphones, I actually have a monoprice headphone amplifier, that's feeding my AKG K702 headphones, and these are my secret. I don't want people to get these because they're so good and they don't cost that much at all. So if you want a good pair of headphones for classical music, especially, look into the K702 from AKG. But you can kind of see here, I only use them for mixing. I don't use them for tracking. On location tracking just means I'm recording a client on location, not at home mixing. And I'm sitting kind of close to them sometimes. You know, I can be sitting off stage, but I'm in the same room with them. And the reason why I use a different headphone for that is because the 702 I use for mixing, they're open back. What that means is the sound will bleed in and out. They sound great, but I will hear the performance. I'll hear the performance on stage through my headphones, just in the hall, and obviously it's not that accurate. So I prefer closed back for tracking. Just it gives better isolation. But for mixing, the K702 is amazing. And I think right now it's only like $200. It's a steal for what you get. They're worth way more than that. Okay, so monitoring, very, very important to kind of keep in mind, because you want to hear what you recorded so you can make adjustments as needed. Now we're going to talk about actually recording the piano, and this is the fun part. So the piano is an interesting instrument because it's physically, it doesn't occupy a whole stage, but the sound can definitely fill a whole stage and a hall. And for piano, I usually like a really wide sound stage. So imagine, right, if you close your eyes when you're listening to a recording, you can almost picture, let's say you're listening to an orchestral recording, you can almost picture where the musicians are. So for piano, I mean, we can call it a single source instrument because it's one instrument instead of multiple people. I still like the sound to kind of almost wrap around my head. It's not the most realistic, maybe, but I like that immersive experience. That immersive experience where the piano just kind of fills my whole headspace in a sense. But the quality of the instruments, it's really, really important, as we all know, because if you have something that's a really bad instrument, you're not going to make it sound like a 9-foot Steinway. It's just not going to happen. I'm sorry. I try really hard. I've recorded on horrible pianos before for clients, and there's only so much I can do in post-production too. So the quality of the instrument is really, really important. The next thing is the space. And I'm sure we all know this too, because we perform in spaces too with pianos. Space is so important. Again, you can have a great 9-foot Steinway in a really bad room, and we've all been there too before. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be really hard to get a good sound. I mean, it's still better than a bad piano, but a bad space is going to be hard to work with too. So just, things to keep in mind. One thing I've heard a long time ago, it's a good adage, is you're not really recording the piano, you're recording the room the piano is in. So that's how important room sound is. And because of that, you're always balancing between, the direct sound you're getting from the strings and hammers versus the ambient and the room sound. And we'll go more into that when we're talking about actually how to mic up certain scenarios, and that will make more sense where we have to balance the direct and the ambient sound. And this is just a picture, of a typical grand piano, and kind of talking about possible mic placement. We're pretty much going to be following this arc kind of above the piano here, or we were looking at on stage, it's going to be kind of behind the piano. Where we're going to be capturing the sound, because the piano projects sound almost, not exactly, but kind of diagonally out of the crooked piano. So as you get closer to the bass strings, you're going to get a darker sound. As you get to the front of the piano near the high register, it's going to be a brighter sound. So you're going to have to kind of play around with that too to get the sound that you want. Now we will talk about possibilities, in a small room. And this is very common too, because we don't always have access to a big hall. So for small rooms, what we can do, this is pretty common, I do this a lot, is do what we call a ORTF setup. And I kind of show you a little diagram there on the right. So ORTF just means two cardioid mics. You can kind of see the polar pattern there. They overlaid the heart shape over the mic to show you those are cardioid. So roughly about 17 centimeters apart. These are not set in stone. If it's a little closer or a little bit farther apart, it's not going to destroy the recording. Roughly about 110 degrees apart. I use ORTF quite a bit, especially in bad spaces. I recorded a chamber string ensemble recently at a bar with really bad room sound. So I actually did use ORTF. But 110 degrees, I don't bring a compass. I don't measure the mics. I just kind of eyeball it roughly. It's going to be fine. So don't worry too much about being super, super precise. It's not a huge deal. So on the picture, in the picture on the left there, you'll see two mics kind of in that configuration. And the reason why those mics look vertical is because those are ribbon mics. I'm pretty sure those are ribbon mics, but they're still in that ORTF configuration where they're pointed at that angle. But condensers will work just fine. So it's actually not that common for ribbons to be in this configuration, but it's a good illustration to at least show you the mic placement. And this is another possibility in a similar room. Instead of ORTF, you can mic the upper and lower register of the piano separately. So you have one microphone over the high registers, another one over the bass strings, and you can kind of mix them in post, and you can add reverb and all that later. So I would say as the room gets worse and worse, if the room is bad, you need to get closer to the piano, right? If you think about it, it makes sense, because as you get closer into the piano, you're getting more of the direct sound and not so much the ambient sound, because the room is bad. So you want to get closer to the piano, so you work more with the direct sound and kind of add more room sound later on in post-production. So yeah, these are two possibilities, but again, not all. This is just to get you started. Two possibilities for smaller rooms. Now for larger halls, this was pianist Benjamin Grosvenor. I recorded him. This was back in March of this year. He came to Denver and played a concert for the Friends of Chamber Music, and I did the concert. And this was my setup for that particular space. I have two mics. Kind of inside the piano, you can kind of see the red lines, and those are my MicTech C5s, and they're in their cardioid configuration. One over the high register, and one over the low register there. And then I have another pair that's about not even 5 feet, maybe 3 to 4 feet away from the piano. Those are the Line Audio OM1s, and they're the omnidirectional mics. So my rationale is the MicTech is capturing kind of the nuance, right, the attack inside the piano, and I'm going to mix that with the room sound being captured from the omnidirectional mics. So this just gives you greater control in post-production, because you can kind of mix and match between the two. If you want more room sound, you can bring up the Line Audio mics in my picture, or if you want more that intimate sound, you can bring up the MicTech. So it just gives you more possibilities in post. And on the right here, you'll see kind of the typical setup for what we call a stereo AB or spaced AB setup for the Line Audios. So again, if you remember your polar pattern, the circle means omnidirectional, and the mics they label as 50 centimeters apart. I never do that close. I typically do about 70 centimeters apart, a little bit farther apart, just to get a little better separation. Yeah. So these numbers are not set in stone. Just remember that. Experiment for sure. And now we will talk about one recording I did before I show you a video clip. So a few years ago, I played a concert in San Francisco. That was me on the left there. And I actually had to bring my own gear to record it because they were going to record it. So I actually brought my Studio Project C4 and my Tascam DR701D. Just to give you an idea, with this level of gear, at this price point, the result you can get. The piano was amazing though. I forgot the brand of the piano, but someone provided piano and he was in the audience, and the piano really helped a lot. So yeah, in the next slide, I will show you a clip from this recording so you can hear the result. Now, before we go, sorry, I do need to mention, if you look at that picture on the left again, you can kind of see the mic stand toward the left there. I just did a stereo A/B, so they were both in omnidirectional configuration. The two mics, they're on a bar, probably about 6 centimeters apart. Just those two mics, nothing else. And we'll take a listen. Oops, sorry, I clicked the chat. That was my bad. Cool, and we'll stop there. We don't need to listen to the whole dance, but yeah, you get an idea. I was pretty happy with how that turned out, especially given I only brought two mics in that recorder. But a lot of the magic definitely happens in post-production, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. So, what is post-production? Well, production is when we actually record, and then post-production is what happens after we record. So I'm a very visual person, so I kind of provided a visual kind of a presentation here. So I'm sure a lot of you do photography too. On the left here, I have a raw photo that I took a while ago on a mountain here in Colorado. It was sunrise, actually, around 7 a.m. I got up there overnight. And then on the right is the process photo, and I actually have the process one hanging in my living room right now. So I mean, the raw photo is fine, but post-production just kind of brings it up a notch, right? To make it that much better, to add a little sparkle. A lot of people, especially with photography, they don't want to do a lot of editing and all that, but with audio, it doesn't make it fake. It just makes it a little better. And I would say, it's hard to quantify, but the actual recording part is about, I would say 60%, and post-production is about 40%, 60% and 40%. So post-production for me is really, really important. Most of the stuff I deliver, if I don't do any post-production, I don't think they're deliverable. It's really, a lot of it needs work. Yeah, that's just kind of the reality. So that's why I do want to walk you through some basic post-production stuff to get you started. So in terms of software, this is where we'll be doing post-production, not back in the day with tape and or destructive editing. So speaking of destructive editing, there are two types of editors that you're going to be hearing about. One is destructive, the other is non-destructive. So destructive editor, what does that mean? Well, it means whatever raw file you feed into the editor after you edit, it will overwrite your original raw take. So some sample softwares, I'm sure you all heard of Audacity because it's free. Yeah, Audacity is great for what it does. Sony SoundForge and Adobe Audition, those are all destructive editors. They have their place. I use destructive editor here and there for, like, for example, noise reduction. That needs to be destructive. But for most things we do, we will be using non-destructive editor. Some examples include Reaper. Funny thing about Reaper, it's what I use, is what I've been using for years. Reaper is an acronym, that's why it's all in uppercase. Reaper stands for, I can't believe I remember this all the time, Rapid Environment for Audio Production, Engineering, and Recording. Talk about a cool name, Reaper, yeah. Logic Pro if you're on a Mac, Studio One from, I think, PreSonus, yeah. GarageBand, again, if you're on a Mac, Cubase, and if you're on Linux, Ardour is a cool one. Reaper is what I recommend for almost everybody nowadays, unless you do a lot of collaboration with other people who use, say, Pro Tools. Reaper is the thing to use. The cool thing is Reaper offers a unlimited free trial. You can literally go download it right now for free, and no features gimped. It's fully featured. Nothing's hidden behind a paywall. And the other cool thing is for personal license, It's only $60 forever. It's not a subscription. You don't have to pay $60 a year. It's forever. Well, okay, it's not forever. It's for the entire version, for the current version, which usually lasts a few years, quite a few years. And you don't need to upgrade if you don't want. So if you want to keep just the $60, you can. And the other cool thing is, if I remember, they have not raised their price in years. It has been for $60 for a long, long, long time. So Reaper, highly recommend to get started, especially it's free to try. So there's no reason not to download it and just kind of mess around with it. And then we will talk about kind of what Reaper looks like. So this was a session I did, well, not a session, this was a concert I did for the Denver Young Artists Orchestra in downtown Denver at their Performing Arts Complex. So I actually didn't use my own mics for this because their halls had a lot of mics already set up. So they provided me with what we call stem takes. So you can tell I think they sent me like 15 tracks or 15 channels of audio, which means 15 mics. This was a fun mix, definitely, but a lot of work to get it sound good. But it's very intuitive. On the bottom you see all these vertical bars. Those are just your audio channel, your controls. You can see the volume, your volume adjustment, and all these mini windows you see. These 3 mini windows kind of in the middle on the right. These are what we call plugins. They're not part of Reaper. Plugins are just additional softwares that give you additional functionality. For example, equalization, reverb, compression, and we'll talk about these in a little bit too. But audio production for classical music especially, a lot of it revolves around plugins. So I can kind of talk to you guys later in a Q&A if you want to know more plugins. I can talk to you more about that. But that's a kind of integral part of production. So yeah, that's what the interface looks like. So just give you an idea. It's pretty clean, easy to navigate. I really like it. Now, just kind of help you visualize how things work within a audio workstation software is to just understand the basic signal flow. So again, thinking back to our first slide, we talked about stereo sound. Everything gets kind of mixed together into that stereo output. So on the left here, we have our multiple track. Let's say you use 4 mics on the piano, right? Like what I did earlier with that big, with the kind of bigger hall setup. We have 4 mics. They get mixed down to 2 buses, and these buses are optional. You don't need buses. The purpose of a bus is it makes plugins a little bit easier to use. So for example, if you have, this is not classically oriented, but let's say you're recording a drum, more of a band setting. You have a drum kit. You have 5 mics on the drum, and those 5 drum mics can get piped down into a bus, and you can put a single instance of a plugin or effect on that bus instead of a effect on every single one of the tracks. So it just makes it easier to manage. You have one bus slider, volume slider to control the whole drum track. So that's why we use this. In classical, I use it quite a bit too. If I'm recording an orchestra for the brass and winds in the back, I might bust those mics into a bus and just have one effect on that. It's just easier to manage. Yeah, but it's not necessary. It's optional, especially if we're just recording 2 mics, on a piano. Definitely not necessary. And then of course it gets piped down into the stereo output, which again you can just do your effects on that instead of on the bus or the track. So you can pretty much do your effects anywhere within the chain. It really depends on the scenario. So we'll talk about EQ, compression, and reverb. These are the 3 type of processing that will be most relevant to us. So equalization, I'm sure, if you have a home stereo system or a car stereo, you've adjusted the treble, mid, and bass knobs before, right? We have all done that. So that's a basic equalizer, essentially. It's what we call a 3-band equalizer, 3 separate bands, high, mid, and lows. But when we're actually getting to audio production, it's infinite how much we can EQ. So on this slide, I just kind of give you 2 charts that I found that are kind of pretty useful to show you what each frequency does, especially this chart on the right. So the frequency band and what they will sound like. For example, if you look at the band number 5, the red one, the red circle, the low mids, the frequency ranges between 250 to 800 hertz, and the tonal quality is bossiness body. For example, like that's an example where I usually really listen for that for piano, because a lot of piano, if you get really close, it will sound boxy. So what that means is you need to cut some of that frequency range. So that's, you go into the EQ and you drag it down instead of up, and we'll look at another example in a bit. So yeah, I mean, and these will come with experience. The more you EQ, the more you just know, like, okay, so this range, like around 300 hertz, we need to bring that down, or maybe around 1000 hertz, we need to boost that a little bit. So this all comes with experience. But the EQ software these days makes it pretty easy to experiment. You can just drag things around and listen. And this is a typical, could be a typical EQ for a piano. On the left here, they use a high pass filter, so they're cutting 75 hertz. I think that's a little too aggressive. 75 hertz, I might cut like something below 50 hertz just to get the low rumble, but depends on the instrument. Sometimes that low rumble is actually really nice if it's a nice instrument. And you can kind of see the other yellow box, search between 350 to 650 to reduce boxiness. That's exactly what I was talking about. But again, in this picture, it looks really, really aggressive, that EQ curve. So, little does a lot. So don't go kind of crazy with it. Just experiment. And of course, you get to into the higher frequencies, it's more kind of the presence between 250 to 850, 2500 to 8000 hertz. You're going to boost that if you want some more presence, especially for a piano that's kind of darker sounding. It's not a bright piano. You could boost the higher frequencies just to get more presence out of the sound. Again, just a guideline, but definitely experiment. Now, this slide, I'm showing you two different kind of general types of EQs. On the left, we have what we call parametric EQ. And on the right, we have graphic EQ. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with graphic EQ because they exist on a lot of the vintage audio equipment too. But graphic just means the bandwidth of each frequency is set for you, so you can adjust your bandwidth, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But you're just gonna adjust the slider up and down for that specific frequency band. Whereas parametric, you pretty much have free reign over exactly how you want to cut or boost frequencies. So bandwidth just means how wide or how narrow around a frequency you want that EQ to affect. So, but if you understand that, and then you can see how limiting graphic EQs can be. For example, if I want, let's say I want to reduce 300 hertz, but I want the surrounding areas to be less affected. I want a really narrow band. Another example, recently, I did a recording too, and the room wasn't great. There was some interference going on. And there were some buzzing going on in the really high frequency range. And in my software, I could tell exactly what frequency it was. Like there was one in like 18,000 hertz range. It's still there, but you really can't reduce that with the graphic EQ without affecting all the stuff around it. But with a parametric EQ, I can just say, just that super, super narrow band. Don't touch anything else. It will just nuke out that single narrow band of audio. It's very precise. So yeah, when you get into some serious production, parametric is the way to go. We pretty much never touch graphic EQ. Now, what is reverb? This is something that we probably hear a lot, actually, especially for piano. I found this, I think, on Reddit, yeah. So because I thought this was really well explained. Reverb is just a natural reflections from the environment around you. Most algorithmic reverb simulate natural reflections of rooms, halls, places, and many more. So what a reverb does is it gives you a sense of space. So it doesn't sound like the recording doesn't sound like you're sticking your head in the piano, right? If you're micing close, if you're micing farther away, it won't sound like that. So reverb is super important because it gives you a sense of space. And I would say I use reverb on 99% of my recordings that I do, yeah, for clients. Even if it's a decent hall, even if it's an orchestra, it needs reverb. Even just a little bit reverb helps a lot. So reverb, it's something you'll be dealing with quite a bit. And of course, there are a ton of different reverb plugins that you can get. Some are free, some you have to pay. But definitely something you will be using quite a bit. One important thing to kind of keep in mind with reverb though, if you're syncing audio with a video footage that you're doing, if you're doing both audio and video, make sure the reverb sounds appropriate for the realism of the space, because you don't want like a big concert hall, Disney Hall or something, that kind of a reverb for a I don't know, like a living room recording, right? It just doesn't sound realistic. It will look and sound really weird. So make sure the reverb match what you want for your final product. We're getting to the end of the audio part. So compression, limiting, or normalization. Compression. So this is different than MP3 compression. We're talking about limiting the volume and the dynamic range here. So compression is a tool that attenuates the volume of the audio at a preset threshold, ratio, and other parameters. So it will make sense on the next slide when I have a visual representation. Compression, essentially, yeah, we're limiting the volume. Now, limiting is a type of compression, but the ratio set to 1 to infinite, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit too. That just means everything above your preset threshold will get crushed. Nothing will go above your threshold. Normalization means raising the level of the entire track to the loudest point. So the loudest point reaches 0 dB, which is the highest point in digital audio before distortion sets in. And this has no effect on dynamic range. We pretty much never use normalization, but it's still an important concept to at least understand what it does. We don't really use it because it doesn't offer a great amount of control. Typically, I will use limiter as a final effect in a signal chain with the ceiling set to -1 dB. A limiter is just a lot more flexible. You can set how hard you want the limiter to work. Sometimes I will use, it depends on the recording, especially with orchestra. If the percussion, for example, gets really loud, I will be more aggressive with my limiter to kind of tame some of the peaks, we call it. A good example is if you watch movies a lot, certain movies, the dialogue will be really, really quiet. And all of a sudden, explosion or music comes out and it gets super loud and you're like, oh my God, I have to turn down the sound, right? So that's what we call a really wide dynamic range, where the quiet part is really quiet, the loud part is really loud, but we don't always want that. Even in classical music, yes, we do need to preserve the dynamic range, right? For example, between pianissimo and fortissimo, yes, obviously. But it's still, you have to think about the playback system some people have. If people are playing recordings on their phones, which doesn't have really loud speakers, if you're recording so quiet, they're not going to hear it. So just keeping that in mind. That's why limiter and compression is still useful in classical music. Just don't go crazy with it. Use in moderation. It's pretty essential too. Now, this is a visual representation of what compression does. So if you look at the chart on the left, we have this audio signal here, this waveform. So on the upper part of this, you see the uncompressed waveform, and the dotted red line shows you the threshold, your preset threshold. You can set that however you want, wherever you want. So if you set it lower, that means more of the audio will get crushed. If you set it higher, that means less audio will get crushed. So of course, when you see the chart on the bottom there, on the lower left-hand side, you see the compressed waveform, and the audio is pretty much now within that threshold that you set, the red line. And on the right here too, you can kind of see 3 different stages of compression. The top part shows you just the raw audio, no compression. And the second one shows you compression, but no makeup gain yet. So what you will see is the quieter part of that waveform, like on the left part of it, where it's kind of narrow, is more or less unaffected. But the louder part, for example, in the middle, is crushed. And then the whole point of compression is if you compress a louder part, you can bring up the quieter parts, so they're more or less equal. So I think this kind of shows you better how a compression works, and definitely use in moderation. Yes. And now we will talk about some video basics. So I remember when I was pre-screening for my undergrad, video wasn't a thing. I only had to submit an audio recording, but definitely video has becoming the norm. So it's good to talk about some basic video recording things as well. Nowadays, we have 3 basic categories of devices we can use for video recording. We all have a smartphone. You can use a camcorder, or you can use an interchangeable lens camera, or mirrorless, or DSLR. Those are all options. But I would say modern phones are extremely capable nowadays. If you have a modern iPhone or Android phone, they're great for this purpose. They're definitely good enough for at least say, a pre-screening recording. they're becoming really, really good. If you do use camcorder or interchangeable lens camera, though, one thing to keep in mind is focal length. If there are photographers here, I'm sure you already know this, but focal length is important because it changes how the subject looks, but it also affects, how far you need to place a camera or the subject. So, and this is why a lot of selfies we take, with our phones kind of makes our face look kind of ugly. It's because that wide angle lens distorts our face. So if you look at the picture on the right, 24 millimeter, the model there, the face is really distorted. It makes the middle kind of stand out. And as you get, that's the focal length become longer and longer, it becomes more natural. So when you're doing video recordings, depending on the space, this may not always be an option, especially if you're in a really small space. You will almost have to use a wider angle lens even on your phone. If you have a bigger space, you can try to place your camera further back, but use a longer focal length or more zoomed in. So yeah, it really depends on the space. Now, video formats and specifications. I've done some projects for clients who they actually send me the PDF document for the requirements for video, which is kind of interesting. So it's definitely good to understand the formats and what some people require. So resolution, these are the three most common we see nowadays. We have 720p, 1080p, or full HD, 1080p is full HD, and then 4K Ultra HD. Frame rate, 23.98p. I love that number because it's so hard to say. We just call it 24p, and that's the cinema standard. All movies are delivered, well, not all, but most movies are delivering 24p, and P stands for progressive instead of interlaced, which is an older format. We also have 30p, 60p, and 120p. Again, not all, but these are the most common. Bit rate, really important too. So bit rate is the amount of video data per second. This has direct impact on your video quality. For example, if you upload on YouTube, especially, I think 1080p at 5 megabits is usually decent enough. You're not going to have any artifact. When you go up in resolution, you will need higher bit rate because more video. When you have more resolution, you have more dots on the screen. So obviously, you need more bit rate to fit all that data in there. My typical delivery formats, depending on the client, if they want 4K or 1080p. For 4K, I do 24p. I always shoot in 24p. I'll do 50 megabits per second for 4K. 1080p, I'll do 24 frames per second and 10 megabits per second usually. I can go lower, I can go higher, but 10 is usually again a sweet spot between quality and file size. But yeah, file size is always something to kind of keep in mind, especially when you go into 4K. I delivered, I think, it was a Mahler 5 we did back in May for a client. Yeah, Mahler 5, I mean, it's a long symphony. I delivered in 4K, the file was 36 gigabyte. The finished video was 36 gigabyte. So yeah, just keep in mind, the higher bit rate you do, the better quality, yes, but also the bigger the file. Now, codec and format. Codec just means how the video is encoded. Nowadays, H.265 and H.264 is the most widely used format, with MP4 and MOV being the most common containers. So if you're on a Mac, I think MOV is super, super common. On Windows, it's MP4. On phones, I think most phones can do both. Yeah. Now about video editing. So video editors, give you some examples here. We have Adobe Premiere, we have Magix Vegas, we have iMovie, which is free. DaVinci Resolve, there's a free version too, and Final Cut Pro. And I use Magix Vegas, so I'm just kind of showing you what the interface looks like. It looks similar to an audio editor. You have a timeline with different tracks. You have a preview window in the upper right-hand corner there. This was last week, actually, the project I'm working on. This was Junction Trio in Denver. It was a really, really good group. So yeah, and they all work in a similar fashion. You're always gonna have a timeline with different tracks. You can cut them, you can move them, you can apply different effects on them. And then if you're recording your audio and video separately, we need to make sure they're synced together, right, in post-production. Now, there are ways to make syncing easier by, I think some software or some hardware too, they have automatic options. I never bothered because I never syncing even just by hand was never that difficult. So all you have to do, I've shown you this in this screenshot on the right here, is just find your transients or attack points. And it's especially easy for piano because piano has such a sharp attack compared to some other instruments. When you press a key down, especially find your forte parts, forte and fortissimo parts, and you'll see a big kind of a sudden attack in the waveform. And that's really easy to find those and just line them up manually and just double check, listen and watch closely. It was never that difficult. So, but syncing is important, and you can also at the beginning of recording just clap, just do a clap. So in the in your editor, you will see your clap in both the audio and video tracks. So you can just line up the clap. That's easily done too. All right, we're getting to the end here. We're doing pretty good on time. So here are some resources for you to kind of keep in mind. For gear purchasing, Sweetwater is amazing. If you call them, you'll get assigned a personal sales engineer. And they pretty much, I would say, have the best service in the industry. They have really, really good service, and their sales reps are very knowledgeable. I've talked to them before. I bought a lot of stuff from them. Definitely, if you have questions, call them. They're more of a phone kind of company, yeah. And of course, you have Amazon, Musician's Friend, B&H, and Adorama. Those are all great. I bought stuff from all of them before. They're all very trustworthy. And if you have questions or you want to ask, for a gear recommendation, GearSpace is great, formerly known as Gear Sluts. They changed their name recently, but they were Gear Sluts, and there will always be Gear Sluts. It's just what we in the industry know. They are the biggest audio production forum. A lot of knowledgeable people there. I posted there back in the day asking for advice. So very good resource. And then that's it. I have my contact information here and my website for my audio business. So in case you guys want to ask me any additional questions, but I will in the slide because we're open for questions, and I can show you some of the stuff I was talking about earlier here. Okay, so hope you guys can see. This is my Mix Pre. There we go. Mix Pre 10 Mark II. This recorder changed my life. This recorder here, this little thing changed my life. Before this recorder, I was lugging like a 60-pound rack with my audio interface and a laptop to record. This thing is about 1,800 bucks. Money, well, I will pay twice that much for this box. That's how good this is. 4 mic inputs on one side, 4 more on the other side. I can record orchestras with this little box. So yeah, this was life-changing for me, yeah. But for most people, if you don't need the 8 inputs, I put in the slide earlier, you can get the Mix Pre 6. It's a smaller version of this. So very, very good product. I have the Tascam I was talking about too. Yeah, these are all gear I use personally. This is the DR100 Mark III. It's a cool recorder. You can take 2 mic inputs on the bottom, 2 external mics. I mean, if you just want to record a scratch track on the piano, you can just put it next to the piano. It's good enough for that purpose for sure. Or you can connect 2 mics, and that will work really, really well. Now let me show you some mics. Real quick. So the Lauten Audio I talked about earlier, these are great. So that's what they look like, okay? Small diaphragm condensers. And as I was saying earlier, this is how you change your polar pattern. You just screw the cap off, okay? It's pretty neat. I like these a lot because they have what we call, let's see if I can show you on camera. They have these switches on the front. One of them is a low pass filter. What that does is it cuts anything above a certain frequency here. I really like these on strings. These are my go-to like string quartet mics. If I do a string quartet, it's these mics because I like a more mellow string sound, especially kind of tame the highs of the violins a bit. So I engage that high, low pass filter at 10 kilohertz. That means it cuts everything above 10 kilohertz. So all that high frequency stuff gets cut out. So it sounds really, really nice and mellow. Another cool brand is Line Audio, which is a one guy based out of Sweden. And he hands assemble these mics. I think he orders parts from Japan. Like he will hand pick parts from Japan and he will just assemble them. These are really, really good mics for what they are. I mean, they're not multi-pattern. That's why I didn't include them in the presentation. This is just omnidirectional. There's no interchangeable capsules. But I mean, look how small that is. Look how small. Oops. Look how small that is. It's tiny, right? And they are really flat sounding, which is good. Very neutral. Nothing gets colored, and they're cheap. They're like $200 each. So really, really, really good brand. I use these from time to time too. So yeah, I think that's the presentation. But I'm open to questions if I can answer any questions that people might have.
Just
I know I saw there were chats coming in, but I didn't want to stop the presentation for the chat.
Yeah, Elaine, did you have a question?
Let me look at the chat now. Oh, okay. Okay, I saw someone. Oh, okay. So you have a question
what
about
is your email?
my email. Let me type in the chat. Yeah, people, you can definitely feel email to help. Feel free to email me.
Your website. You went so fast, I couldn't get it.
Sorry, I just typed my email in the chat.
Thank you. And your website.
Yes, I will do that too.
Thank you, honey.
No problem. Upright piano at home, that's the tricky one. So if your lid can open, like a lot of uprights has an open lid, openable lid. Some uprights don't. You could put a ORTF above the opening. Does that make sense? Can open the lid halfway or fully and kind of go that way, just to get a more clear sound. I wouldn't just go kind of put where your head is when you're playing, because there's that board there that's kind of blocking the sound. So I would open the top if you can.
I heard that putting the microphones near the pedals on an upright piano is always good. It's a good solution too, because that's where we have the strings.
Correct. Yes. If you can take that bottom board out, I wouldn't put so close to the pedal though, because you get a lot of pedal noise. When your foot is in the pedal, that's where you can get. Yeah. Right. So go up a little bit. Yeah, go up a little bit off the floor. That's definitely a possibility. And you can actually do that on the grand piano too. A lot of people put a single mic underneath the piano, the grand piano, for that warmth. I never done it because I feel like I already have enough warmth if I just mic the strings on the inside of the piano. But yeah, you can do that with both upright or grand piano. Put a mic underneath a grand piano. Works.
Okay.
I had a student once who had a lot of pedal noise.
Yep.
And the person could get rid of it.
Yep. I do that too. Yeah, I do noise reduction. Oh yeah.
No, I couldn't believe it, but it had no noise.
Yep. It's doable. It's a lot of work, but it's doable. It's like Photoshop for sound. It's doable.
I have a question. Can you put the recording made on Audacity to the Reaper?
Okay. You want to put a recording made from Audacity in Reaper.
Since you are recommending it.
Yes. So recording made in Reaper. What do you mean by that? We have to kind of clarify.
Recording made in Audacity, and then you are recommending for the after.
That's fine, because okay, I see what you mean. Yes, I see what you mean. Yes, because it doesn't matter what software you record it with. Your raw file is going to be that raw file. It's going to be either a WAV file or someone. Oh, you said AAC. Yeah, it might be AAC or WAV. Yeah, you can import that into any software you want.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, even with Reaper files, you can well, not the Reaper project files, but the raw audio tapes. You can import that into a different software. It'll be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any more questions?
That was amazing. That's all I have to say.
Oh, my pleasure. It's hard to condense.
You just blew me away. Whoa.
It's hard to condense 11 years. No. How many years? 2007. I can't do math. 19 years. 19 years experience into 1 hour. It was difficult, kind of initially putting this together.
I think I'll hire somebody. That's for sure.
And that's okay too. I will say I have a friend. I think she also went to Northwestern. Like, she will do recordings at home, and she pays me to do post-production for her. She'll send me the recording. She's located in California. She sent me her recording. I'll just spend an hour and then clean it up for her. I'll do post-production for her. Yeah, like, you can definitely hire people for that.
Right. There's a guy in Chicago, Doug Bistro, and he has a studio, and he comes.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I'm sure there are tons of guys.
My kids and
there you go.
It, does a good job.
Yeah.
He took the AIM exam, you guys.
Oh, nice.
More than 30 years ago. Well, 20. I don't know. That was amazing, honestly.
Thank you.
I can't believe you got all that in 1 hour.
Just a tiny bit over, yeah, tiny bit. But we started late. I think I didn't start the presentation
That's
at
okay.
10 o'clock. So I'm like, okay, we're still good.
Oh my God.
Yes, wonderful. So Elaine was the person who was always asking for a tech presentation, and I think we
That was a little
satisfied your
over the
desire,
top.
right? We recorded it. I have to say, there was so much information and it was so packed. Thank you so much, Owen, for giving us a glimpse of. Let me just, Elaine,
And
can you mute yourself because the screen is going to you, and I'm just thinking of the recording.
what I can do, Yumi, is I can share the PowerPoint file. I can upload the the file itself, and people can kind of go back to the PowerPoint if they feel like.
That would be wonderful. That would
I
be
can do
great.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting to get a glimpse of, I'm looking over the shoulder, how a professional sound engineer works. Most of my colleagues are, I guess, a little bit like me. We are either using our iPhone or we are hiring a sound engineer. But I feel like as a teacher, we should know what is going on. And a lot of the terms that you used, we saw in instructions, we read here and there, but I'm not sure how many people really know what they all mean. So that was great that you broke it down. And as Elaine said, there was so much information that I might have to go back to the recording too to work through it. It would be wonderful if you could send us the PowerPoint. Owen, thank you so much for your time. It's great that this is all possible online. And by the way, it's
Are you kidding me? You get me to talk about audio for an hour. I love it. That's what I do.
Yes. Thank you, Owen. I'm sure we will go back to the recording. We learned so much. Thank you for everyone is here. It's such a busy month, but we have that recording, and we will go on in January with another tech talk
Now,
about.
what did you play? Was that Scarlatti or Haydn?
That was Bach, French
It was
Suite number
Bach.
6. It was Bach. Yeah, it was a Gigue from the 6th French Suite.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Yep.
Nice job.
Yeah, sounded
Thank
great.
you.
That was the best part of the whole thing.
Okay.
Only kidding. I'm only kidding. Wow, that was great.